Kitsune and Remnant by Red Devil 360, Chapter 25, Making Amends. Naruto opened the door to his dorm and immediately stepped to his side as the blaze of petals shot at him. Ruby impacted the wall behind him hard enough to activate her aura. Naruto, meanwhile, calmly stepped inside the room and closed the door behind him. She's been practically vibrating to do that for a while, Yang commented, seated on her partner's bed with Blake. I can imagine, Naruto replied dryly, pulling down his mask and walking over to his own bed, placing the box gently next to him. How was the ramen? Blake asked tentatively. Enlightening, Naruto responded. We spoke shortly, but a lot was said. The door opened and Ruby entered, rubbing a large red mark on her head. What did you do that for? She pouted. Because my ribs are still tender, and you wouldn't help that situation, the shinobi replied with a dry look in her direction. Ruby pouted further, but hopped over to plant herself next to her partner. "What you got there?" she questioned, pain forgotten. "A gift," he replied shortly, glancing at the case. "Oh, what kind of gift?" Ruby asked again, leaning over to look at the box closer. "A sharp kind." Naruto grabbed the box and opened it, revealing the tanto inside. It was a birthday gift. "Wait, birthday?" Yang questioned before all three girls looked over at the calendar on the wall. The date clearly on October 10th. "Today's your birthday?" "Yes, I told you last week," Naruto reminded softly. Ruby sucked in a large gulp of air and began bouncing on the bed in anticipation. "Ruby, no." He shut down immediately after seeing the glint in her eyes. Ruby's world crumbled. But party," she mumbled. Naruto patted her on the head. "I don't celebrate my birthday, remember? And I don't accept gifts either. Haven't gotten any before and it's not going to change now," he explained. "That's kinda sad when you think about it," Yang explained out loud bluntly. The other blonde merely shrugged. "I've celebrated my birthday properly only once. Never had a chance, never had a reason." Blake frowned. "Why is that?" Naruto glanced at her. "Why don't I celebrate the day my parents died, and my life arguably went to hell not even hours after I was born?" he responded incredulously. The rest of the team winced, and Blake at least looked apologetically. "Sorry, it wasn't." He waved her off. "It's fine." "Hey, what's this mean?" Ruby asked. He looked at her, inspecting his new tanto, apparently having taken it out while he wasn't looking. She was eyeing a set of kanji inscribed on the opposite side of the blade. Just below the hilt running down the blade ran an inscription. "Blake," he beckoned over. Instead of translating, Blake bit her lip but moved over to sit beside Ruby and leaned over to read the kanji. She was silent for a moment as she thought it over. "The first line is a sentence, I think. Endure the currents. A motto." Naruto nodded encouragingly. "The Uzumaki clan motto," he explained. "Do any clans have a motto then?" Yang asked, while Blake continued ponderingly. "Most small clans don't tend to have one, but many of the old larger ones do. A leftover from the Warring Clans era," he explained. "Oh, what's the Hakoga's?" Ruby asked excitedly. "Hokage," Naruto corrected, "but the Hatake's motto, I believe, is Stand True." "What about the Hyugas?" Yang put forward gently, but out of curiosity. Naruto smirked. "We see all," referring to their ability to use the Byakugan. The all-seeing eye thing," Yang put together. Naruto nodded and Ruby scrunched her nose up. "That's a bit cheesy," she muttered, but Naruto still heard her. He chuckled. "Yes, me and Hinata laughed about how her family weren't very creative." He smiled sadly as he trailed off, blinking himself out of it a moment later. "I've got it. The last are three separate words. Family, duty, devotion," Blake finished with a triumphant smile, then frowning as the words registered in her head. Naruto didn't reply, however, this time, a faraway look in his eyes. He snorted eventually. "Cheeky bastard," he murmured, shaking himself out of his reverie. "Isn't that kind of mean for him to say after what happened?" Yang asked. He shook his head. "No. This and 7 others were commissioned before the attack by Akatsuki. We were each meant to have one, likely with similar inscriptions," he told them. Ruby huffed. "Wow, this has been a heavy day for you, hasn't it?" she joked weakly. Naruto smiled and nudged her in the side, and seemed to be having those a lot lately, causing her to give a rather unladylike snort. Oh yeah, that reminds me, he said. He flicked his wrist and the ring of a kunai bounced off Yang's forehead with a sound of crack. Yang fell off the bed in a yelp of pain and began rolling around on the floor, furiously rubbing the sore spot on her forehead as Blake and Ruby collectively winced at the sight. Things that are private are meant to stay private, he slightly admonished as the girl gradually stopped rolling about and moved onto her knees. Yang suddenly looked down at her pocket and pulled out her ringing scroll. Naruto caught the image of a man with messy blonde hair and the words "Dad" underneath before the image disappeared, and Yang answered the call. "Hey Dad, what's up?" she questioned, standing and moving to another part of the room. Blake's ears flicked before she could stop it, drawing the shinobi's attention. A curious Ruby followed while Blake handed the blade curiously back, which he took care of gracefully and slotted it back into the box. "Dad's here! Now! What are we waiting for?" Ruby yelled in excitement before blurring out of the room in a flurry. "Yes, that was Ruby already halfway down to you. I guess we'll see you soon then, Dad." Yang finished the call and hung up. She then looked at the pair still on the bed in question. "Oh, don't wait on our account." Naruto smiled and gestured at the wide-open door. Yang gave the pair a quick wave as she left the room at a more sedate pace compared to her sister. Blake stood with a poorly hidden, forlorn expression. Naruto, however, grasped her wrist and gently guided her back to the bed. "What's bugging you?" he questioned with a minor frown. It was almost comical how Blake pulled off the startled cat look. What do you mean?" she spoke. Naruto gave her a look. "Every time Yang and Ruby mention their parents, your ears would twitch, and this isn't the first time that it's happened. Pretty much everyone has come forward at some point during the year to explain their family. Even Whis has, except for you," he said gently. "What's wrong?" Blake's ears flattened against her head, and a frown pulled at her features, but she refused to answer. Naruto cocked his head. "Are you jealous?" he questioned. The faun's head snapped to him. "Never!" she yelled before realizing she broke her silence immediately. She sighed. I don't have a good relationship with my parents," she admitted. "While I'll never be jealous of why they have, whenever they talk about their parents, they always remind me of mine. It's a stupid thing. You don't have any, and neither do Nora and Ren. Wish's family explains itself, and here I am moping around about the terrible relationship with mine," she lamented. Naruto put the box in his hands to the side and turned to face the girl. "Well, I always thought people deal with things differently and are affected by things differently, so your plight isn't as bad as you would assume, and I don't think that the others will be particularly offended about your own issues." "Really?" Blake snorted. "Both our teams are one gigantic emotional mess. Okay, you've got a point with that, but that's not the issue here," Naruto conceded with a weak shrug. "But my point stands," he reaffirmed. Blake fiddled with her hands. "My parents were a part of the White Fang back when it was peaceful. My father was the first leader of the White Fang as its creator, but he stepped down when it started to become more radical. Both my parents wanted me to follow them out, believing that it would do me no good to be in an environment like that, but I was young and stubborn, so I ran off with the White Fang without telling them," she explained, eventually uh, settling her hands in her lap. "Om knows what they think of me now. Well, if they're anything like the parents that I know, they'll forgive you and still love you. Everyone makes mistakes in their lives," Naruto offered. "Apart from Whis," Blake retorted with a small smile. "Yes, but we really should stop talking about her like this," Naruto smirked, causing Blake to let out a quiet giggle before a frown overtook her again. "I wonder what they're doing now," Blake wondered. "Why don't you ask them? Surely you know where they live and how to contact them." Blake's startled cat was still perfect. I could never. What would I even say? What would they say?" She squeezed uncharacteristically. Naruto sighed and stood. "Well, there's only one way to find out, isn't there?" He held out a hand to the girl still sitting on the bed. "Believe me, you don't want to squander this. There are those who'd love to still have their parents, myself and other people between our teams included. You have a unique opportunity," he persuaded. Blake, however, still looked unsure of herself, but nodded and took the offered hand. They left the room in silence and made their way to the CCT tower. The grounds were busy even at this time of the evening, so Naruto avoided any attention as they waded through the crowds. The elevator up thankfully was free, and they soon entered the main room, covered in rows of computers, only some of which were filled. He continued to gently lead her and sat her down at a free desk. After a moment's hesitation, she typed in the details and a connection symbol appeared on the screen. Naruto placed a hand on her shoulder as she looked to Bolt, and physically support seemed to smooth her nerves long enough for the connection to succeed. On the screen appeared an older woman, likely late 30s, early 40s, with short black hair and ears. It was also clear where Blake got the startled cat look from. "Hey, Mum," Blake said quietly and a shy wave. Her mother blinked before tears apparently gathered in her eyes. "Blake," she whispered in replying. Realizing the conversation was heading somewhere private, he departed after giving Blake another encouraging shoulder squeeze. A few moments later, he stepped out into the cool autumn breeze, a far cry for the likely still summer-like conditions back home. He was making his way through the courtyard when an Iwa Jonin shunshined next to him in a cloud of dust and small pieces of rock. "Apologies, Uzumaki-sama, but the Tsuchikage has requested your presence," she calmly informed with a small bow. Naruto sighed but nodded. "I shall be there momentarily." The Jonin nodded and disappeared. Rather than heading back to the dormitory, he now instead went in the direction of the gardens where he felt Kurosuchi's signature, and he arrived in a few moments without any hurry. He passed by the sentries without issue, easily ignoring the few irritable glances he got, and despite the Kage knelt over a patch of flowers. "Tsuchikage-sama, you called for me?" Naruto greeted with a short nod. Kurosuchi looked over with a small smile. "Yes, Naruto, I did," she replied, standing and brushing her red dress off. "First of all, congratulations on your victory," she commented as she approached. Naruto shrugged half-heartedly. "It was nothing. He wasn't going all out," he replied to pass off. Kurosuchi chuckled. "And neither were you," she pointed out easily. Naruto sighed. "With all due respect, what's this about?" he asked, and this time Kurosuchi's smile was a little more strained. With a small gesture, she began leading the blonde in a circuit around the garden. "Despite what you think, we're not going to simply discard you, Naruto. Even if we could, you're too powerful shinobi to just forget about. Not to mention you're highly regarded, but most if not all others back home." "Thanks," he replied, slightly sarcastically. Kurosuchi sighed and hung her head. "Please, don't push me away. I'm trying here." Naruto glanced at her out of the corner of his eye. "Now is a little too late, unfortunately," he remarked. The Kage grimaced again. "I know, and I'm sure Kakashi has already apologized to you, so I'm doing it now. I'm sorry, Naruto, but I didn't know what to do." Naruto paused. "What do you mean?" "We're young, and I was inexperienced as a Kage. When suddenly the Jinchuriki started disappearing, I didn't know what to do. Nothing had prepared me for this, so both myself and Chojuro looked at A and Kakashi for guidance and how to proceed. Obviously, we know how that turned out," she explained. "I knew it was wrong, but we were hiding it from the normal shinobi forces as best we could as well." "How do you explain why your most powerful shinobi are just being up and kidnapped?" Naruto frowned. "You don't? There'd be sheer bloody panic," he murmured. Kurosuchi nodded and linked her arm through Naruto's. "If he protested, he didn't say anything. When we lost Gaara as well, there was no way we could hide a Kage being taken, and we revealed everything long after your sensei was killed, and you were told as well," she continued. "And how have they taken it, the rest of the forces?" Naruto questioned. "Kakashi never said." We've definitely taken a blow to morale, and the Gokage as a whole is being questioned for our integrity. Believe me, you're not the only one who has lost faith in us," the Kage finished. "So, this really is a shitstorm right now," Naruto snorted with some amusement, and at least succeeded in bringing a small giggle from the Kage. Yes, things aren't looking bright. Kakashi already explained about the situation back home. Naruto nodded in confirmation. Then you know how close we're walking to the edge of currently. Part of the reason we're here in person and with such a large escort is because we believe that Katsuki might make a play for you during this tournament. It would make sense, Naruto agreed grimly. They've progressively snuck in more and more missing nin over the course of the year, with no way of tracking or even detecting it here or back home. Not to mention Itachi also admitting they had formed an alliance with the White Fang here, so they're clearly in on it, Naruto theorized. Those were our thoughts as well, Kurotsuchi agreed. I don't suspect you're going to tell Aspen and General Snee, he questioned. The Kage shook her head. We are still undecided. A himself is also concerned with how close you are to the sisters, she slightly notified. Well, tell him he can shove that right where the sun doesn't shine. What does he think I'm going to do? Switch sides? Naruto responded heatedly. Are you? The woman stopped to stare at him in the eyes. Naruto glared right back. I might if people keep giving me reasons, he stated as he continued walking. Kurotsuchi caught up a second later. Apologies. That was rude. She apologized, making Naruto grunt in response. Naruto remained silent, and they continued their impromptu walk around the beacon grounds. Occasionally, Kurotsuchi would glance at her companion, which the blonde would catch. What? He eventually asked. The woman bit her lip. I don't know. You look just happier somehow, she observed. Naruto gave her a look and she grimaced. Okay, perhaps not now, but in general, I'd say coming here has probably actually helped you a bit, taken some of the stress off. I'd say being here actually made me more stressed, Naruto retorted, causing Kurotsuchi to shrug. Anyway, if there is nothing else, he questioned as she continued to stare. She blinked and blushed slightly. Yes, sorry, one last thing. I know what you said back on the ship, but we'd like you to protect the matches later this month. Naruto sighed another power play. I'll think about it, he conceded. That's all I ask, she replied, giving his arm a little pat, and he turned away. Oh, and Naruto, she hesitated when he looked back. Did we still have a chance? Naruto shoved his hands in his pocket and shrugged. Who knows, he replied before stalking off, leaving the Kage alone in the garden. Naruto let out a quiet yawn as he stepped into his dorm room. Oh, hey, he addressed Ruby and Yang, who turned to face him. The man he presumed was their father stood behind them. They were curiously out of their uniform and in casual clothes rather than their combat ones that they usually wore. Swai sat at their feet, a silly grin on the Kogi's face. Oh, hey, where were you and Blake? We came back and you weren't here, Ruby asked curiously. Naruto closed the door behind him and began taking off his battered flak jacket. Blake is just taking care of some business and will be back later, and I was talking with one of my leaders, he replied, now working on his bracers and shin guards. I see. Well, in any case, Naruto, our dad, Taiyang, dad, Naruto, Yang introduced as the man stepped past his daughter to offer his hand. A pleasure. Ruby and Yang have told me a lot about you, he politely greeted, but with a wary look in his eyes. Likewise, Naruto replied to his fellow blonde, taking and shaking his hand. The blonde man stepped back as soon as it would appear he wasn't being impolite. We were going to ask if you and Blake wanted to join us with a trip to the fairgrounds. Periwinkle are probably going to join us as well, Ruby questioned. They're holding a fireworks show in honor of the Gokage's arrival. The shinobi glanced out the window at the night sky and shook his head. I haven't really had a break since my spar earlier, and I need a shower and a change most of all. He gestured to his scruffy and dirty uniform. Small spots of blood were also present. Yes, I can see why. Fought by the way. I don't think we said that earlier, Yang remarked. Yeah, I mean, you beat the Hokage. Doesn't that mean you're the Hokage now? Ruby asked curiously. Naruto chuckled. No, it doesn't work like that unfortunately. Kages reign until they either resign themselves or are killed in combat. No Kage has yet been forced out of office before, he told them. Sounds like a morbid position to hold, Yang commented with a raised eyebrow. Perhaps from your point of view, only one Hokage has yet to die in combat, which was one that resigned last year, a woman called Tsunade. Each has died in service and protection of our village, and I doubt any of them regret it. Wow, you guys don't do anything by halves, do you? Ruby laughed. You're only figuring this out now, Naruto replied incredulously. No, I just thought I'd comment about it again. We've seen how you fight, and there's nothing half about it, Ruby continued, but got off track. Are you going to join us? Yang questioned, heading to the door. Maybe, maybe not, he replied vaguely with a lopsided grin. His fellow blonde rolled her eyes with her own grin. All right, well, if you change your mind, she responded, leaving through the door with her sister and father. A pleasure to meet you, Taiyang said as he left the room, and Naruto simply replied with a nod. The door closed behind them, leaving the shinobi in silence. Now alone, he quickly finished the stripping and stepped into the bathroom and turned on the shower. He did a quick inspection in the mirror to make sure any bruises and cuts he obtained from earlier were healing well, and jumped into the water. He didn't usually take long showers, and this was no different. A swift 3 minutes to wash off the dirt and sweat. He was out. He had changed into some casual clothes when the door opened and Blake stepped through, a thoughtful look on her face. Hey, how'd it go? He asked quietly, finishing buttoning up his black shirt. Blake looked up in slight surprise, but relaxed when she saw it was him. Then she smiled. It went well. She didn't have long to talk today, so I'm going to call her tomorrow as well. My dad should be there as well. And what did they say? That brought a reaction out of the fondness. They forgave me, just like you said they would, she whispered happily. Naruto stepped forward and placed a hand between her ears, just the way he knew she liked it. True to form, her eyes visibly brightened at the touch. See, aren't I good? He grinned down at her. Blake nodded. Yeah, you are. She smiled and shook off the hand to engulf the blonde in a strong hug, to his own surprise. Thank you, as usual. You always seem to make things right somehow, she muttered into his chest. His friend had been really cuddly recently, he thought as he returned the hug as strong. It's what I'm good at, apparently, but you're more than welcome, Blake, he replied softly. What brought this on? Blake merely hummed and brushed the tips of her ear underneath his chin. You're a good hugger. Besides, it just feels right. Earl, I'm happy for you. No one should alienate their family if they can help it, Naruto continued as he broke the hug. Blake smiled at him. Yes, and you gave me the confidence to face my problems. She placed a hand on his cheek and stood on her toes to press a soft kiss to his cheek. As I said before, thank you. She fixed the man's collar as she pulled away with a minor blush. What's with the get-up? She questioned. Naruto, who was mildly put off, took a second to respond. There's a fireworks show at the fairground in a bit. Ruby Gang brought their dad, and Periwinkle are joining them now, I think, as well as a bit later. Do you want to come? He asked. Blake frowned. I don't like fireworks. Too loud, she explained with a flick of her ears. Naruto raised an eyebrow. I can probably make you a noise-dampening seal if you want, he offered. Blake blinked. That would be really good if you could. These things always make loud noises an issue. But they're cute, Naruto remarked as he turned away and subsequently didn't see the blush rise back on Blake's cheek. The fauna shook the blush off her face and disappeared into a drawer, returning to the shinobi's side a moment later with a bead bracelet. Here, you can use this, she provided. Naruto glanced at her hand and took the bracelet. Thanks. It shouldn't take too long if you want to shower and change, he clarified. I will, thanks, she expressed again, but walked off. Blake took longer than he did in the shower, which was naturally to be expected, and by the time she was out and dry in a new set of clothes, he'd finished the seal matrix on her bracelet and was just putting the finishing touches on the power supply. Here, it's done, he announced, and Blake stepped closer, dressing in black jeans and a purple blouse. Thank you, she smiled as he slipped it over her wrist. He then covered it with the palm of his hands. The kanji glowed on the individual beads as he fed chakra into the matrix. There, it should be self-sustaining now, but if you ever need me to top it up, just ask, he explained. You just turn it on and off by squeezing this bead here. He gestured to the one in question. I'm testing whether my seals are capable of using aura, but for now, that's all I have to do. Why don't you try it out? Blake squeezed the bead and her ears immediately started flickering around. How will I know if it works? She yelled, likely without realizing. Naruto winced and recoiled slightly. "It is," he reassured with a small grin as Blake's expression lightened. "That's cool," Blake admitted, squeezing the same bead to shut it off. "Aren't I the greatest?" Naruto asked with an even larger grin, which turned into a laugh as Blake slapped him on the arm. "Come on, it's dark now, so the fireworks will probably start soon," Blake said, turning to lead the way out of the room. Naruto pulled off his mask as they left their dorm together and made their way down the fairgrounds, where hordes of students were already gathering. They weaved their way through the stalls and grounds of people to where Naruto sent Ruby and Yang, and reached them in a relatively short time. "I thought you weren't coming?" Yang asked with a small smile as they approached. "I changed my mind. You know how much I love the nightlife," Naruto replied with his own hiding grin. "Hello everyone, by the way," he greeted the two Periwinkle and Coffee. Taiyang and Crow were off to one side, quietly talking between them with Zwei at their feet. "Hey there, I don't think we've been properly introduced before. I'm Coco. The cute one with the ears is Velvet, the big fella at the back is Yatushi, and the one with the red hair is Fox." Coco stepped forward and introduced herself and the team. "I know Yang through the school gym. A pleasure." He nodded to each of the four in turn, although it's probably irrelevant. "Uzumaki Naruto," he replied with his own name. Coco grinned. "We know. We were at the spar earlier as well, by the way. Nicely done. Very decisive," she complimented. "Thank you," Naruto returned with a small nod. He turned to the others. "How long until the fireworks, and where are we sitting to, do you know?" Whis checked the silver watch she had on. "The show should be starting soon. I managed to secure us some seats in a clearing made from this event." She gently took Ruby's arm, not that she complained, and led the way forward. "They're this way." The rest of the group followed behind as the sound of general conversation picked up among them. Para stepped up beside him, still covered in her own genjutsu. "Hey, although people keep repeating it, nice fight today," she whispered, sneaking her arm around his. "Thanks," Naruto replied simply as they moved past the stands and into the trees, then clearing beyond that overlooked the cliffs. Deck chairs were dotted around, and towards the side was a stand where one could purchase what looked like snacks and drinks. Naruto let out a small sigh of relief as he took his seat towards today, and had been a long day. Para, beside him, pulled out some linen. "Did you want anything from the stand?" she asked. "Just some water will be fine, thank you," he answered, and the disguised redhead wandered off with a few others. As he was left alone again, he let his head rock back against the chair and stared up at the stars, deep in thought. "See anything interesting?" A feminine voice spoke next to him as a chair creaked. Naruto glanced over at Winter, settling in beside him in casual clothes also. "Well, there are just as many stars as there were last time I counted," he replied sarcastically. Winter chuckled. "If there is anything you who would actually count them, it would be you," she countered in jest. "What was the reaction to your spar earlier?" she questioned next. "I think a mix of surprise, respect, and regret. They've asked if I would protect the matches between our genin later," Naruto revealed. Winter nodded slowly. "A move to show they still have your support. Their position is likely weakened in the aftermath," she theorized. Naruto nodded. "Got it in one," he agreed. "You always were good at politics." Winter patted his leg. "Don't worry, I've got your back," she chuckled. Naruto snorted and shrugged. His eyes traced the gathering crowds on reflex, and spotted small groups of shinobi among them. Power returned with a bottle of water in hand and gave it to the blonde with a smile. "Thanks," Naruto said as she sat. Are you going to accept? Winter asked after he'd taken a swig. Accept what? Pyro interrupted curiously. He glanced over. Being a proctor for our matches later this month, and honestly, most likely. Do you have a reason not to? Pyro asked next. Naruto shook his head. Not really. No. The Gokage have kinda put me in a bind by offering me this olive branch. It will show our forces that they're trying to show we're moving on. By rejecting it, I'm basically telling them to fuck off. He sighed and crossed his arm. I hate politics. Para put down her own drink. I saw Blake is wearing a new bracelet. I figured she wouldn't be here on account of the fireworks. She doesn't seem the type. Did you have something to do with that? The redhead changed the subject. The blonde nodded. Yes, she admitted she struggled with loud noises on account with her ears. I made a sound dampening seal on the bracelet to change that. Pyro smiled. That was nice of you. At this rate, everyone will have their own personal one. You should start a business, she joked. Naruto shrugged. I do. Back home, technically pretty much all the seals used by Konoha were technically made by the Uzumaki or are based on their formulas and techniques. As the last Uzumaki, I basically get royalties every time one is bought. The main barrier seal was actually bought from us. So, like my cereal brand, Pyra compared weakly. Kinda. He was interrupted from going anything further when the first firework went off over his head in the dazzling blue, and the crowd appropriately oohed and awed as more followed in all manner of colors and patterns. Naruto relaxed for the first time in about a week as he watched the spectacle. Come what may, he'd beat it just as he'd do so before. He felt a hand slip into his own. He glanced over at Winter, who had staunchly looked away from him. Happy birthday, she whispered. End of chapter 25.